If people were asked the question, does God get angry? The answers are usually that God is full of love and never angry. But here is the thing, there is no shortage of fire and brimstone in the Bible. It's clear from the opening pages of Genesis that God gets angry sometimes, and He's not afraid to show it. Believers, doubters, and everyone in between have been debating what it all means for centuries. But one thing is for certain, when it comes to wrath, no one does it like God. Are you curious about what God's wrath is like? This video will show you 5 times God showed His wrath in the Bible. Before we get into it, you should hit that like and subscribe button, and don't forget to share the video with your friends. Number 1. The Great Flood and the Ark of Noah. Noah's Ark is one of the few stories most people recognize. Between Adam and Noah, God was constantly annoyed with humanity. Adam's disobedience opened the floodgates of disobedience for everyone after him. In Genesis chapter 6, God even regrets creating humans and devises a plan to wipe them out with a global flood. During that period, God saw that people on earth were very wicked and constantly had evil thoughts. But God found favor in Noah because of his righteousness, a rarity among the people of his time. Noah had 3 sons, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. God promised Noah that he would make a special agreement with him and instructed him to build an ark. God told Noah that he, along with his wife, his sons, and their wives, would be saved from the coming flood by entering the ark. He instructed Noah to build an ark of gopher wood with rooms inside, 3 decks, and a door, and to cover it inside and out with pitch. Noah obeyed and did exactly as God commanded him. God gave Noah a unique task. Noah was told to bring 7 pairs of every kind of clean animal, both male and female, and 1 pair of every kind of unclean animal, also male and female. And don't forget to bring 7 pairs of every kind of bird, male and female. This way, there will be plenty of offspring to repopulate the earth after the flood. Noah and his family entered the ark to escape the upcoming flood. Every land animal, male and female, went with them, 2 by 2, following God's command. Then God closed the door. Afterward, the flood started. The deep underground springs burst open, and the sky's windows opened. It rained continuously for 40 days and nights. The water level rose until all the tall hills were covered. Everything living on land died in the powerful flood. The water covered the earth for 150 days. Then God thought about Noah and the animals on the ark. The water went down, and the ark stopped on the mountains of Ararat. Noah first sent out a clever raven, but it just kept flying around. Then he tried a friendly dove. It flew off but returned, unable to find a place to rest. After waiting for a week, Noah sent out the dove again. This time, it came back with a green olive leaf in its beak. Noah realized that the land was finally drying up. With a booming voice, God called out to Noah, "Step out of the ark. Bring all the animals with you so they can roam, multiply, and spread across the land." Noah and his family emerged from the ark, followed by the animals, ready to explore the fresh, new world. Afterward, Noah made an altar and burned offerings as a gift to God. Then God spoke, promising, "I won't curse the ground because of humans or flood the earth again." Even though people's hearts are often inclined towards evil from a young age, God blessed Noah and his family, encouraging them to have lots of children and spread out across the earth. This was the first time God showed His wrath in the Bible. Number 2. The Tower of Babel. After the Great Flood, people spoke a single language and migrated to the land of Babylonia. Their ability to speak the same language helped them work together really well. They agreed to make a huge tower, super high, almost touching the sky. They wanted to reach the heavens through it. They wanted to get famous through this tower. God saw them begin building the tower and was angered. He perceived their intentions, and in his infinite wisdom he knew this stairway to heaven would only lead the people away from God. The goal of the people was not to glorify God and lift up his name, but to build a name for themselves. Before they finished the tower, God made everyone talk in different languages. Because they couldn't understand each other anymore, they couldn't finish building the tower. So they went to different places around the world. That's how different languages and cultures started. The Tower of Babel was in old Mesopotamia, by the eastern side of the Euphrates River. People who study the Bible think the tower was like a step-by-step pyramid called a ziggurat, which was usual in Babylonia. The story of the Tower of Babel shows how people thought highly of what they could do, but God saw things differently. It's also one of the most popular instances that God showed his wrath in the Bible. Number 3, the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah in the Bible serves as a warning about the devastating results of sin. In this story, God tells Abraham that he plans to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah because of their very bad actions. Concerned for his nephew Lot and others, Abraham pleads with God to spare any righteous individuals living there. Abraham talks with God, asking if he would spare the cities if even a few good people are found. God agrees first to save the cities if 50 good people are found, and later agrees to save them if only 10 good people are found. Angels from God came to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot, who lived there, welcomed them at the gate. He asked them to come to his house so he could wash their feet and give them food. The angels agreed and followed Lot home. Lot was originally not from Sodom and didn't do the bad things that many people in the city did. In Sodom, a common sin was that men engaged in sexual acts with other men and boys. This behavior gave rise to the terms sodomy and sodomites, named after the city's widespread sin. When the angels went into Lot's house, a group of men from the city gathered around Lot's house. The men outside Lot's house shouted, "Where are the men who came to you? Bring them out so we can know them." Lot begged them to change their minds. He even offered his 2 virgin daughters instead of the 2 visitors, but they were insistent on having those men. As the crowd moved to break down the door, the angels inside pulled Lot back inside and shut the door. The 2 men asked Lot, "Do you have any other family here? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or anyone else in the city? You need to get them out of here because we're going to destroy this place. The people's sins have made such a loud cry to the Lord that he has to destroy it." However, Lot couldn't convince his sons-in-law to leave the city. Early in the morning, the angels urged Lot to hurry. "Quick," they said, "take your wife and your 2 daughters and leave, or you'll die when the city is destroyed." Lot hesitated, but the Lord showed him mercy. So the angels took Lot, his wife, and his daughters by the hand and led them out of the city. They told Lot to run to the mountains, but Lot asked if they could go to a nearby city called Zoar instead, to keep his family safe. The angels agreed, but they gave Lot and his wife an instruction. They told them not to look back. As they flee the destruction, Lot's wife looks back to the city and is turned into a pillar of salt. The cities are destroyed by stones raining down. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah is the 3rd time God showed his wrath in the Bible. He expressed his anger by destroying a whole city. Number 4, Moses and the 10 plagues of Egypt. The 10 plagues of Egypt is a very popular Bible story. It was one of the few times that God showed his wrath in full. The Israelites were slaves in Egypt for 400 years until God sent Moses to rescue them. Pharaoh was so stubborn about keeping the Israelites as slaves that the Egyptians faced terrible disasters. The first plague in Egypt was when the Nile River water turned into blood. Since Egypt depended on the Nile for everything, this was a huge problem. God made this happen through Moses and Aaron. They went to the edge of the Nile, and Aaron hit the water with his stick, turning it into blood. This killed all the fish, and made the water everywhere in Egypt red. This lasted for a whole week. Even though terrible things were happening, Pharaoh still wouldn't let the Israelites go. Next, Egypt was invaded by frogs. Although it might not seem as bad as the river turning to blood, it was still terrible. Frogs started appearing all over Egypt when Aaron stretched his hand over the waters. The Bible says frogs were everywhere, covering every inch of land. The Egyptians couldn't escape the frogs, no matter where they went. Pharaoh was shocked and begged Moses and Aaron to ask God to get rid of the frogs. He promised to let the Israelites go if the frogs disappeared. God removed the frogs, but Pharaoh didn't keep his promise, and the Israelites remained enslaved. Aaron hit the dust with his staff, and bugs, possibly lice or gnats, covered Egypt, bothering everyone. Even though the Egyptians couldn't get away from these bugs, Pharaoh still wouldn't free the Israelites. Next, God sent a plague of flies throughout Egypt after Pharaoh refused to allow God's people to go free once more. Except for the land of Goshen, where the Israelites dwelt, Egypt was completely overrun by these pesky winged insects. The livestock plague wiped out all the domestic animals in Egypt, which was very terrible for people who relied on them for their livelihoods. Adding to the misery, Egyptians had to watch the Israelites' animals stay healthy while they buried their own. Then came the boils plague, which caused painful bumps all over the Egyptians' bodies, including their animals. This suffering didn't affect the Israelites. Egypt got hit by big hailstones. They killed everything outside. Some hid indoors, but others died. The area where the Israelites lived wasn't affected. Pharaoh got scared and promised to let the Israelites go if the hail stopped, but when it stopped, he changed his mind again. Next, a lot of locusts came, covering the sun and wrecking things. Pharaoh asked Moses to make the locusts go away, and they did, but Pharaoh still said no to letting the Israelites go. Then there was darkness in Egypt for days, but not in the area where the Israelites lived, but Pharaoh still wouldn't let them go. Moses warned him about the final, worst plague, where the firstborn of every family and animal in Egypt would die. That night, it happened. Egypt mourned, and the Israelites were finally allowed to leave. Number 5. The punishment of Moses. He was denied entry into the Promised Land. Moses holds immense significance as the leader who guided the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt. He's the main character in 4 books of the Old Testament. Both in the Old and New Testaments, he's praised for believing in God's promises. The rules he gave to the people of Israel are what the nation is built on. Jesus even said that these rules would always matter, even when everything else changes. But this blessed man once received the wrath of God. After leading the Israelites for years, he couldn't enter the Promised Land. This was because he made a mistake at the rock of Meribah. God instructed Moses to speak to a rock to bring forth water, but instead, he struck it. This act of disobedience angered God, resulting in his decree that Moses would not be permitted to enter the Promised Land. It might seem unfair, considering how many times God forgave Israel's mistakes. But Moses' mistake was a big deal because he didn't do what God asked. Certainly the direct consequences of this action were not bad for the Israelites. They had been in danger of dying of thirst, and this action saved them. But the indirect consequences were very dangerous spiritually. There was more to it than just the small difference between talking to the rock and hitting it. Instead of speaking to the rock as a way to show how God cares for people, Moses got angry and spoke harshly to the people. This made it seem like God wasn't kind, even though he was. Also, Moses acted like he and Aaron were the ones making water come out of the rock, taking credit for what God did. Anyone who represents God should always make sure God gets all the credit. Otherwise, people might start praising them instead of God, which isn't right. Even though it might seem like God punished Moses harshly for a small mistake, God knew that it could have a big impact on people's beliefs. He had to stop that from happening. Moses begged God to let him enter Canaan, the land he had dreamed of for 40 years, but God refused. Moses always prayed for mercy for others, and God listened, but not for himself. So Moses accepted his punishment with humility. However, God was kind to him. 1,500 years later, God let him enter Canaan when he stood with the Lord on the Mount of Transfiguration. That was Moses' first time in the Promised Land. God respected him by giving him a better entry than if he had gone with the disobedient Israelites. All right, guys, we've come to the end of this video, and if you enjoyed it, do well to click on the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to check other videos on our playlist. We've got some amazing contents for you. See you in our next video.